Hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for Everything Combat. One more episode to put in the logs here. I'm joined by my co host, Jeffrey Wilson. And, Jeff, I'm going to let you do the honor of introducing our guest. I, of course, watched the epic fight many years ago live on TV.
Yeah.
And this young lady is the sister of one of the combatants that's, a guy that's stuck in my memory forever. And hopefully this episode will shed some light on what happened that night and since then, and hopefully we can raise some money for this legend of combative sports.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. And, obviously this is called Everything Combat, and it's not just about necessarily physical combat in the ring, in the octagon, etc. The little tagline for the show is because life is a fight, and we all have our different fight in life, whether it was C.T. Fletcher talking about his heart transplant, anybody. And this story here that we're going to listen to is another, is no exception to that tagline. Life is definitely a fight. Well, going back to the history of things, where this really kind of all started, I mean, obviously Gerald McClellan is his name, the G-Man, former two-time middleweight champion. On February 25th, 1996 in London, England, he fought two-time middleweight champion Gerald, fought first time stepping up to, I believe it was super-middleweight, in his fight against then champion Nigel Benn in London. It was a crazy fight. The first round, in my humble opinion, it should have been over. Gerald tagged him while he was against the ropes and knocked Nigel out of the ring. Looked like it was kind of a long count to me, but later on in the fight, I believe it was the 10th round, Gerald suffered some kind of injury, and we're going to talk about what exactly happened. His sister is an absolute soldier. His sisters are absolute soldiers, and they have stepped up low these last 20 some years and helped Gerald as he has needed assistance in pretty much all walks of life. She's going to kind of explain what the injuries detailed. And but first of all, I want to say happy anniversary to the champion, because on this day in 1991, Gerald McClellan beat John the Beast Mugabe in the first round to win the vacated WBO middleweight title. Lisa McClellan, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your time. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Well, always want to thank our guests for being generous with their time, and you are absolutely no exception. Sound like you've been yesterday. You weren't sure if you were going to make it. Do you want to kind of speak to some of the things going on in your life, your personal life, that kind of have come up recently?
Well, actually, 25 years later, I think I'm just getting old, and life is just different. Gerald is. I do a lot of lifting every day. And a couple years ago, I had a torn rotator, so I had to rehabilitate from that. And then yesterday, I had a surgical procedure because I had 2 ruptured tendons in each hand. So I had that fixed yesterday. It was a bad day yesterday, but I felt a lot better this morning. So I'm good today.
Well, when you said you had gone through that, I was like, please take your time to heal. There's no rush. But you hit me up this morning. We're like, when we can do it. I was like, yeah, that's the fight in the McClellans right there. Sorry, Pat, go ahead.
Yeah, that's injuries you've received basically from taking care of Gerald and lifting him up constantly, right?
Yep, just overusage of my ligaments, my tendons. It's been 25 years, and things are just harder to maintain now.
Right. I'm guessing you're still pretty dang strong, though.
Yeah, I do. He's probably about 240 pounds right now.
He's that heavy?
Yes.
Wow, you are lifting some weight.
And probably 50% of the time I'm doing like 100% of the lifting, which I just succumbed to. I've tried to do it for the last 25 years without we don't use a wheelchair, we don't use a walker. I make him walk everywhere we go, just so he don't lose the little ability that he has.
Right.
So lately I'm more willing to try different devices. So right now we're in the process of getting a ceiling lift, so it'll do the lifting for me.
Okay.
So excuse me, hopefully that'll be done within the next 3 months, and that'll kind of save a lot of wear and tear on me.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely got your hands full. Well, going back to like talk about who exactly we are talking about, we're talking about Gerald G-Man McClellan, two-time middleweight champion. And like I said, I first kind of caught on to him. I think it was that John Mugabe fight, because John Mugabe was a beast. The name was quite appropriate, and Gerald just destroyed him in that first round. And then I think it was the next time I'd seen him fight Julian Jackson the first time, and Julian Jackson was a beast too. And then I saw him on the undercard of the Julio Cesar Chavez Frankie Randall fight, May 17th, 1994, Julian Jackson Part 2, and Gerald just destroyed him. And, you know, he had fought Roy Jones, I think, Olympic trials or something when they were younger, and he had beat Roy, and Roy had even said, I want nothing to do with Gerald. But, I mean, we are talking about, you know, an absolute fierce competitor. And February 25th, 1996, if you can... I know, you know, watching kind of the documentaries in the prep, there were kind of some issues with management. He had left Emmanuel Stewart. Talk about kind of what was going on in Gerald's world leading up to that day, and if any of those things, if you think, could have contributed to what went down that night.
Well, it was 95, February 25th, 95, the night that he actually fought Nigel.
Okay, my bad. I'm sorry.
And no problem. He had, I guess it was, from what and I've talked to Emmanuel since, and it was just like a difference of opinion. Gerald was used to having all of his time. He went away to train, I want to say one of the Klitschko's or Holyfield, and Gerald was upset because he wasn't normally there. So they just kind of had a difference, you know, they just split. And he ended up with some guys that we grew up with that he used to box with when we lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when he was an amateur. And they were sort of like tag-alongs. They would, you know, if he needed somebody to, you know, work the corner, or they had no business being there that night.
Right.
So which I've never watched the fight.
I was going to ask you that. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Okay, sorry.
Never watched it, and I don't ever want to watch it. They failed Gerald. I feel they failed Gerald when he needed them the most.
And to speak to what you're saying, Lisa, you know, Stan Johnson is who you're talking about, and I'll mention him by name. Stan Johnson was a guy that used to bring guys literally looked like they got off bar stools and would bring them down to the Quad Cities where I live. Of course, you're about probably 70 miles northeast of where I live, up there in Freeport. But Stan Johnson used to bring supposed boxers down from Milwaukee, and these guys looked like they just got off bar stools, and they were basically paid victims that were brought down here to the Quad City boxing events to get, you know, the locals some victories on the cards. And so I know Stan's history all too well.
Including his disabled sister was also put in a fight that probably should have never been allowed to fight. But
what?
They had no business being in Gerald's corner that night.
No.
Emmanuel told me if he was there, Lisa, he said we would have never took the fight in England, and if we had it, the fight would have been over in the first round. Like I said, they didn't have any business being in the fight with Gerald that night. I think,
Well, and the thing is, and had Emmanuel Stewart been training him for that fight, he probably wouldn't have run out of gas either. And he was hurt early on. Whether it was that headbutt or what they deemed being the damaging blow or the accumulation, certainly Emmanuel Stewart would have had him trained up and prepared and ready to go.
You know what? In my opinion, I don't think it was anything physically wrong as far as because Gerald was prepared to fight. I mean, I've seen Gerald get a phone call a week before a fight and go take a fight and knock the guy out in the first round. So he wasn't just the type of fighter that trained before a fight. This is what Gerald lived. This is what he did 7 days a week.
Right.
No matter where he was. So he was always ready.
So
I don't think it had.
I wanted to ask you, something about something if it was something physical wrong with him. Another Kronk fighter, and I don't know if this is true or not. That's why I'm asking. Tariq Salmasi said he, in a later interview, sparred with McClellan before the Benn fight, and after he hit Gerald with a jab, he started blinking, and in such a fashion where they had to stop the session. And there was incidents in the fight where I don't know if that was just his normal kind of tick or something was up where it looked like he was blinking a lot. You haven't seen the fight.
He shared that with me as well, and then I don't know either. I don't know if something was wrong prior to the fight. When Gerald left home, he was his normal self. So I'm not sure what happened, but I know. Even watching like just certain parts of the fight, I could tell early on.
Whoa. Got a dog there. Sorry.
He wasn't his normal self. He was not his normal self. And they should have been able to identify that as well.
Yeah, somebody, obviously who knew better. When there was not having seen the fight, but I'm sure you're aware of it. And I don't know if this was attributed to conditioning, but Gerald's mouthpiece kept coming out, it was hanging out. And I don't know if that was just like you said in the documentary, him not getting enough air, or it was just the conditioning. Or I'm not again, it's kind of, it's not sure where to not necessarily point the finger, but kind of pin down what was up.
Gerald has always been a tremendous athlete. And I don't think, even if he hadn't trained for that fight, he would have ran out of gas that early. So I don't think it was anything that he did wrong with training. I don't think it was anything like that. I think something happened, and it just kind of snowballed into something big.
Right.
And he knew something was wrong. That's why he took the knee, because he's not a fight. He's not a quitter.
No.
I can only imagine in my mind he was just trying to make it to the end of the fight.
Yeah.
And when he wasn't able to make it, he took the knee because he knew he was in big trouble.
So what ended up being the diagnosis from the medical team? You spent a month in the hospital. What eventually did they end up diagnosing?
He had a bleed on the right side of his brain.
And did they have to do surgery to relieve the pressure right away?
Yep, they did the surgery. We gotten a phone call that evening because it was like a 6-hour delay. And the call came from Donnie Pendleton, who was the second guy in Gerald's corner. He said, we just called to let you guys know that Gerald lost the fight, and they took him to the hospital for observation. Within 5 minutes, he called back, and he said, they're rushing Gerald into emergency surgery. If you guys don't give permission, he'll be dead in 5 minutes.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's the way it went. And it took probably 4 days before we could get different family members there. None of us had passports. So 4 days later, we got family there, and they got him taken care of. It was my sister, my aunt, and Gerald's girlfriend that actually went over first. And they went over first. They had most of the information that they could obtain about Gerald's care had to come from Don King, which I had a problem calling the hospital and had to be given permission to get information about Gerald. So I went to the American Embassy and created a fuss because I didn't feel like Don should have been making that call. So long story short, we got Gerald transferred. They kept saying he wasn't ready to be moved, but nothing was happening. He was laying in bed every day on life support. So Don ended up moving him to a place in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And he got him moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And from then, we went and got him, and we moved him to a place in Wisconsin where he recovered until like August that year. And then we brought him home.
Wow. Man, well, going back to kind of the end of the fight, I'm started to kind of rewind a little bit. Had he said anything in the fight? Because I had heard and I'd read that he had said he wanted to stop in the fight, that he didn't want to fight anymore during the fight. Had you heard anything about that?
Donnie, I went over. I got a phone call probably about 2 weeks later because I stayed back here. So I got a phone call like maybe a week after they got back. Donnie and Stan and those guys flew back to Wisconsin. Donnie called me, and he's like, we need to talk to you. There's so much stuff going on. So I drove over to Wisconsin, and at the time I was in nursing school, and I had my tape recorder in the back seat, so I stuck it in my pocket. So I recorded the whole conversation, and they were saying, Don paid somebody to put something on Gerald's mouthpiece, and Don told us we better not talk. Well, I gave the tape to the FBI.
What?
Which I wasn't, I guess because they didn't know I was recording them, it wasn't admissible. But when the FBI went to do a deposition, they denied that it was them on the tape. So that basically led nowhere. But
well, so just to recap that statement, because that's pretty huge, and I have never heard that before. Someone that you had spoke to, affiliated with the Don King camp or Don King, said that they had put something on Gerald's mouthpiece.
No. The guys, Stan Johnson and Donnie Pendleton.
Oh, okay.
When they got back to Wisconsin, they called me and they said, you need to get over here. We really need to talk to you. So when I went over, I put my tape recorder in my pocket, and I recorded about 2 hours of everything that happened while they were over in England. I went home. I listened to the tape. I gave the tape to a guy named Warren Flagg that was investigating Don King on a bunch of other things that he was involved in. Gave the tape to Warren. Warren went to the FBI went to Donnie and Stan for a deposition, and they denied that it was them on the tape. So in the media, Don accused the FBI of paying me $200,000, which was the furthest thing from the truth, because after Gerald got hurt, I didn't go back to work because I didn't know if I was going there next. It just wasn't a need to go back to work until we knew he was going to be okay.
Right.
So, and literally I had zero income. So, I mean, it was a time when like my utilities were going to be threatened to be shut off, but he was saying that the FBI had given me $200,000 to say this stuff against him and that. But it ended up with Don saying that he had paid a bunch of medical bills that he never paid, that he actually paid as a result of this incident. But they denied saying the stuff on the tape. But one of the things that Donnie Pendleton told me was that Gerald said, feel like water's running in my head.
So how much did Don King end up? Is there a concrete number that Don King actually donated or had to pay or anything like that towards Gerald's care and medical expenses?
Okay. Gerald's purse was $67,000.
I'm sorry, we got a little echo going on. Pat, did you move your mic or something?
No. But wait a minute. Gerald's purse was $67,000. That's it?
He received $67,000 for the Nigel Benn fight.
Dear God.
Wow.
And there was the rehabilitation center that Gerald was in Milwaukee. Don had said in an interview that he was the one paying the bills. So I supplied the unpaid bills that they weren't paid. And so I think the total of those bills was like $32,000 at the time. So he did send a check for the $32,000 to cover that, which was probably like maybe a half a month stay at the rehabilitation hospital. He paid that, and probably, which he said that he taken care of all the expenses from my family, flying everybody out, the hotel, food, all the accommodations. But I later got a call from the BBC that there was an insurance policy on the fight, that Don was the beneficiary, that Don cashed in the policy. So then he said, oh, that's the money that I used to take care of your family. So at one time he said it was out of his pocket, which the plane ride back to the U.S. was like $98,000. He said he paid that out of pocket. Well, then when I went after that policy, then supposedly that's where all that money was used for. So he didn't get any of that either.
Wow.
Don King.
So does he? I'm assuming he at least gets government disability and stuff, right?
Oh yeah, yes.
Which is not a king's ransom by any means. I mean, that's probably just enough to put some food in the fridge or a few other things.
Think about it. Joe was 25 years old, so he gets what he's paid into Social Security at 25 years.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. So, excuse me. How, as Gerald kind of settled in and started to get better, how aware was he of everything that kind of went down? I know that he had suffered some memory loss due to the brain injury. So how aware of everything is he, or was he?
He don't remember anything that happened in England that night. We have conversations where he asks me what happened, why is he blind, how come he can't see, and I tell him the version that I want him to know of what happened that night. He always want to know if he got knocked out. That's his biggest issue, and I just paint the picture to, so it's not hurtful for him.
But
that's what he remembered.
I saw it was another Sports Illustrated piece, and I forget the gentleman's name. He was a photographer that came and visited you guys, and you told Gerald, you just said his first name, and then Gerald said the last name. So he remembered, back to whoever this photographer was. I forget his name. Do you remember who I'm talking about?
Teddy Blackburn. Oh, his memory is wonderful. I mean, he don't have any short-term memory, but his long-term memory is great.
Oh,
He
okay.
remembers every last one of his fights, what round it ended in. He could tell you. His memory's probably better than mine.
That's awesome. Well, obviously, this has been rough for the whole family, but I think it was 2007. There was a fundraiser. It was overseas. I forget exactly where it was, but it was the first time Nigel Benn and Gerald had come together since that night. And obviously, that was the first time you had seen Nigel and had a chance to speak to Nigel. I mean, I can't even imagine that moment. What was that like when you guys kind of first laid eyes on each other and first had a chance to parse this out, I guess?
The most difficult thing I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
And we had actually, it was in England. We went back to England, and, excuse me, the day before, we were actually there 2 days before we actually met with Nigel, because we made it there before he did, because he came from Spain. And so the day before, I couldn't do it. I could not face the man that had drastically changed our lives so much. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to be there. If I could have got a plane out of there that night, we would have left. And I prayed about it, thought about it, prayed about it. And one of the big things for me with coming there was I wanted to put the whole situation behind me and move on. So I wanted forgiveness. I just wanted closure.
Well, because early on he did make statements like "better him than me," like kind of the night of the fight, like a couple days. I mean, he had made some pretty harsh statements. Obviously, that many years later, things had changed. And I'd heard you say in the documentary, like, you didn't want him around anymore, Nigel Benn.
Well, it was some guy did a book and said that I was in England saying I wanted Nigel dead. First of all, the first time I went to England was in 2007, and I was scared as hell to be over there.
Right.
So I definitely didn't even want anybody to know I was there. So, I don't know where that came from, but I've never ever wished death on Nigel. There's no way I could ask God to spare Gerald's life and then ask somebody else's life to be lost.
Right,
that is
right.
absolutely not the truth.
Okay.
Was I mad? I was mad as hell.
I'm sure.
But he came to our room, and I was sitting on the bed, and someone answered the door, and he kneeled down beside me, and he probably cried for like 15 minutes before we even said anything.
Wow.
And I looked at him, and it seemed like a lot of the hurt. I don't know if it was looking in his eyes, or it just seemed like I wasn't angry anymore. So I took him over to talk to Gerald, and right away Gerald knew who he was, and it was, Gerald still has his sense of humor. And when I put Gerald's hand in his hand, and I said, Gerald, it's Nigel Benn. And he started rolling up his sleeves. And I'm like, Gerald, what are you doing? And he said, I'm getting ready to knock this motherfucker out. And I'm like, oh, my God.
That's awesome.
And then Gerald started laughing. So it kind of broke the ice.
Wow.
And then Gerald said to Nigel, man, you almost took my life. And everybody lost it. I mean, Gerald got so emotional, I made them stop the camera because I felt like that wasn't a moment for everybody to see. I thought that was something that should have been really private, you know. And then Nigel got extremely emotional, and
yeah, he had to step away.
It ended up with my aunt, Linda, on the floor, like cradling Nigel like a baby as he was crying. That's just how emotional it got. It was very emotional.
Wow.
And so we got past that, and we spent a couple hours together, him and Gerald talking, me talking to him, spent a lot of time talking to his daughter and his dad, and they had shared some things that, you know, they went through as a family. You know, everything wasn't easy for them. You know, it was suicides and suicide attempts, and, you know, and it really softened my heart towards the whole situation. So when we left there, I was totally at peace.
Wow. I mean, obviously, you just kind of explain it, but man, how much of a weight was that just off your shoulder, your heart, your spirit, your soul, that you had kind of carried that for so long?
Oh yeah, and I was very angry, and it wasn't so much angry that Gerald had gotten hurt. It was just how insensitive he was about the whole situation. Wow. But I mean, I did learn that he said he stayed at the hospital with Gerald until my sister and my aunt got there. They suggested that he leave. So, you know, I learned a lot of those things that the media didn't tell us.
Yeah, I had never heard that Nigel stayed there, was there with him. Yeah,
well, that's what he told me.
Well, and I mean, you know, it's not like watching the documentary and kind of following Nigel's career. I mean, it's not like, he definitely was going through his stuff, like you said, even suicide attempts. You know,
and he blamed a portion of that obviously in his drug use and kind of an implosion on a lot of guilt he had over that fight with Gerald, right?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
I'm saying Nigel Benn, his drug use and subsequent suicide attempt and all that sort of stuff. He blamed, you know, obviously at least a portion of that in his mind on the guilt he was dealing with over the fight with your brother, right?
Yes.
I'm sure that, you know, I being a professional fighter for many years, never dealt with having an opponent end up in that kind of shape, you know, afterward. But certainly can't sit well with anybody. I know that Ray Boom Boom Mancini went through some serious stuff after Kim passed away. So I
Sugar Ray Robinson. So somebody died after fighting, you know, with Sugar Ray, and that really affected the rest of his career as well. Well, Well, how is the G-Man doing today? You were kind of speaking off air. He's had obviously some ups and downs. So how is Gerald faring this day, 25 years later?
We probably went about 23 years with absolutely no problems, him being completely healthy. Actually, he hadn't aged a day. Since the fight, he stayed very young looking because he didn't have any stresses. We had it all. And then his colon stopped working. And I fought for the doctor told me right away that the best solution would be to remove his colon and he'd wear a colostomy bag. And I was immediately offended because I thought, well, they think he's blind, he's got brain damage, because, we'll just make him wear a colostomy bag. And I didn't want that for him. So I fought it for 2 years. And then we ended up in a situation where we had to do it. And probably the best thing we did, because he is extremely healthy. With all those toxins out of his body, his brain is functioning better, his complexion is better, he's healthier, and he's super huge. Before the surgery, he was a 30, now he's a 40.
Does he get, and you don't have to mention any names, but I was kind of talking to Pat, obviously, before the show, and I don't mean to mischaracterize it, but it just seems to me that the boxing community, I'm sorry, I know the boxing community at certain point in times have been very generous and very helpful. I guess more individual fighters has he had visits from some of his old friends or people who he used to work with?
For a fundraiser, Evander Holyfield and Joe Frazier came down. Teddy Blackburn, which was a photographer, he came quite often, maybe once a year.
You had said you tried to put something together and had guest appearances scheduled, but none of them showed up. Is that accurate?
Right. It was at a bad time. It was in February. All of his friends from Detroit was supposed to come down, and the person that was chartering the bus ended up getting sick, and so that was canceled, which had most of the fighters from Crump on the bus, so they weren't able to make it. Bronco McGirt, I think that's his name, he came. And then we've gone other places. I mean, we've traveled quite a bit to like different boxing events, and he's met with a lot of other fighters. We went to the California Hall of Fame, and we spent a lot of time with Julian Jackson and his sons. That's probably about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, if you want to, we'll say it again before we get off the air, but if you want to bring up the website where people can send donations, because obviously we'd like to try and get some money headed your way for his care, because I know it's been a tough road for you guys.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Lisa.
Right now, I was in the process of redoing the website, where someone was doing it for me, and with everything going on the last probably year, I haven't got a chance to really follow up with it. So I don't know if the information is the correct. I'm sure it's the correct information on the website where to send donations. And then also I have a GoFundMe page that was linked to the night that I had the event a couple years ago. That's still up and active.
So, okay. So the trust you guys have at Fifth Third Bank, is that one? Can I shout that one out? The address to where to shoot that stuff to?
No, that's not anymore.
Okay.
The Fifth Third was they were a trust company, and at the time when they got involved, Gerald had assets. And since that's no longer, they were no longer needed. So we don't have Fifth Third anymore. They did us a favor for a couple of years and just took care of his mail, but no.
So the GoFundMe isn't active anymore either, or is that can we shout that one out?
No. The GoFundMe is active. It's just Gerald McClellan.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, if you can do that.
On the website.
Yeah, it was, okay. So you said there's GeraldMcClellan.com. Is that, shout that one out?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep, GeraldMcClellan.com.
Very cool, very cool. And kind of to let you slide here, but over the last few years, obviously we lost Emmanuel Stewart. Kronk Gym has burnt down. Just is Gerald aware of any of that, and what was his thoughts when Manny passed away?
I keep him up on everything. Very emotional. And I did call Emmanuel's wife. He talked to Emmanuel's wife. So he knows about Emmanuel. I haven't told him about Kronk Gym burning down, but I do keep him up with Joe Frazier passing, Emmanuel passing. We do stay active on that kind of stuff.
Okay. Any closing questions, champ, for Lisa McClellan here?
I'm good. I'm just, it's amazing that fine line that we ride as combative athletes, and who gets that unlucky card and who doesn't. It's really a game of roulette. And your brother inspired me a great deal. I watched him an awful lot, and I was watching the day that happened, and it was heartbreaking. So I think about your brother. I think about your brother quite a bit, actually.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And we can't thank you. I mean, you are an absolute soldier, Lisa. I mean, we need more Lisa McClellans, man. You're a testament to humanity. Not a lot of family members would step up and sacrifice like the way you have for your brother, and it's absolutely a beautiful thing. And ladies and gentlemen, if you can find it in yourself to donate or help out the McClellan family, go to GeraldMcClellan.com, and you can do that very thing. Lisa, thank you so very much, and I wish you guys all, the McClellan clan, a very happy holiday.
Thank you so much. Same to you guys.
All right.
Happy Thanksgiving.
This has been Lisa McClellan, and tell Gerald happy anniversary for winning that WBO title on this day, 1991. When
I didn't even realize it until you said that. I certainly will.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate you.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye-bye.